Okay, all right. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen. This is the update we have every week coming from the University of Michigan. We do this so we don't crowd out other higher priority projects. We're mindful that everyone does have other work, so we do promise the 30-minute teleconference. Very often people find it unnerving the way we whip through these issues, but it's the best we can do at the moment. Our hope here is that we come out of this session with some sentences crossed out and some new sentences that are done in bold underline. So we try to get into the nitty-gritty in these interactive sessions. We call them markup sessions. So, but first, let's introduce others on the call. Craig, do you want to start?
Yeah, my name is Craig Butcher. I've been here for well, basically a third of a century. I'm the program manager for mechanical systems. I was a general foreman for plumbing and air conditioning on the University of Michigan Central campuses, well, the non-hospital facilities. My background is not an ordinary one for this. I was a philosophy major and so on. So anyway, what I'm doing right now is trying to make the air conditioning and these other, and water treatment and programs work here at the university in a major cost-cutting mood and reorganization that we've been going on. So that's my goal, and make it practical and workable and actually worth doing anything. And I know that I've been paying attention to the Legionellosis, the standard has been coming for a while, but I haven't devoted a lot of attention to it because, sufficient unto the day shall be the evil thereof. But now it appears that we're going to have to deal with it, so we'll figure out how to do it.
See, that's what I love having a philosophy major around. You have all these very eloquent statements. You never fail to regale me with some of your linguistic manipulations and art. So anyway, thanks very much, Craig. Hey, you want to introduce yourself to Craig, Ted?
Yeah, sure. Ted Weidner. After over 30 years running facilities in higher education, I'm now an academic, and I get to complain about how horrible the facilities are, but I'm teaching students in the process.
When they tell you that it always used to work before and it was great before you changed everything, then you can say, well, I was here before we changed anything.
Right, something like that.
Something like that, right. So, okay. Well, all right then. We could pick this up in any direction. I frankly was thinking Larry Spielvogel would be calling in. He's the one that made sure that I didn't forget this, so I have to give him credit for his time and expertise, as I always do. So we have this document. I believe we've got it. It's the 4th public review. That's important because the committee, we may make some statements to the last committee. Well, where were you in the first draft? And then we don't have an answer for that other than to say that we've got all kinds of stuff going on. So I know that Craig had some passions about this, and I thought we'd unleash them. How about you, Ted? Have you had a chance to scan it?
I haven't looked at it to all that great a detail, Mike. Why don't you point out the big changes?
Yeah, okay. Well, they don't, because we don't always get that from ASHRAE at the 4th markup. In the 3rd markup, you might have seen the strike and bold version of this. I do have some what I'll call comments that are already submitted as drafts. I wanted to give us something to start from. We have until November 10th, frankly, to do this. But I did want others to see that we were not starting from scratch. We looked it over a little bit, and so what you're seeing right now is me pulling out my typical canards, which is a scalable risk. One of the ones that I just installed there, and this is the one I'm hoping that you guys will, if I can navigate my way on my own site here. It's the one I just uploaded this morning, and had to do with the way they scope the document. So, for example, they've said here the purpose of the standards is to establish blah blah blah, and to establish minimum Legionellosis risk management requirements for building water systems. And remember, it's a risk management standard, right? And to provide a basis for assessing the risks this risk and assessing remedies against other risks present in human-occupied buildings. So that's me trying to come up with language to say, there's about a bazillion other risks within the built environment, and you can come along as you usually do and say, how could you possibly be against safety? And frankly, the end user owner fiduciary does have an interest in safety, but it comes at a cost. And if every committee thinks that they're the only safety technology in a building, we cannot possibly reconcile them. So this will make rain for attorneys and other litigation and all the other bad things that happen. We don't do things right. But I thought I'd put some language in there. Of course they're going to reject it, but it is a way to get them thinking and to at least put our footprint there out. And let them know that, remind them that they're not the only problem on Earth. And so I try to say this here: Legionellosis is one of many risks with which real asset managers must reckon. So that's my general statement. I thought that if there's any default position, that's the one. There's many other specific areas where we have to deal with more prescriptive requirements that will be difficult to deal with. But this is the one I thought I'd get right up front to give the committee the signal that they're not the only trouble on Earth. So with that, I thought I'd unleash Craig, who had some thoughts.
Well, just on a general thing, I mean, the point of health and safety is to actually improve health and safety to the point, to the extent that sometimes you wind up doing things that they consume a great deal of time, energy, and resources, but they have a negligible actual impact. That's a concern. If we're going to have to do these things, I want to be able to do them effectively and hopefully have some measurable effect. And and the other problem that we have is where standards, the standards should be perspicuous. I mean, it should be something that it's not a strange, arcane, Kafkaesque, wandering through a dark forest of mysteries, because it should be something that makes sense to do. I'm looking at, when I looked at the document the first time, and again, I haven't, as I said, I haven't looked at this for a couple, I knew it was coming, and the draft was out, we can prepare the information and make the documentation, and then that at least shows we've done some due diligence. But if something, happens, and if you look for Legionella, you will find it, particularly in, certain kinds of environments like cooling towers. If it happens, then I'm just wondering, is there any expectation that, a good faith effort to at least go through this process, the value of which would be, hey, at least recognize that you might have risks, and so at least becoming aware of them so that you might know how to deal with them. Is there anything here that by doing this you wind up setting yourself up so that, oh, you missed this step or that step wasn't right, and now you're actually in a worse position than when you started? It's a long sentence, sorry.
Well, you raise a good point. If it's always present, does this document establish a threshold? If you find a couple of, now I'm revealing the fact that I have only looked at this from an administrative scope, territorial standpoint from the user owner and final fiduciary. But in this document, if your statement is if it's always present, does that mean that it never goes away? And what is the degree of how clean of Legionellosis should you be or can you be? Is that stated here anywhere in this document?
Oh, well, not in the version that I read before, and that was one of the questions that we had. That the document itself was not, it wasn't a prescriptive thing, where it said that, and I know that OSHA is trying to get away from some of that too. I mean, you have a hazard level, but it's more of a guideline than anything else, because you're not absolutely sure. I mean, you can't say, well, it's like the question of what we set our alarm limits for refrigerant monitor detection. Our occupational safety people want to set it for half of the OEL, the occupational exposure limit, but that doesn't mean that, at 50 parts per million or whatever it is, that it's dangerous, and at 49 it's safe. I've always been told, because I'm not I'm not a bacteriologist, that basically that, Legionella is one of the many species that are out there, and that you'll almost always be able to culture it in stuff that's had air streams flowing through it. Our plan is for our cooling towers, for example, which I think is probably the least of the hazards, is always been to just basically ensure that our biological control was such that we had an accessible standard of, like, our goal was to keep it down to less than 1,000 colony forming units, right, in the bulk water, and that on the basis that if Legionella was only one out of countless species, then presumably it would be proportionally represented as a part of 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
We don't always achieve that. I don't think there's any organization that actually can maintain a cooling tower, unless you're going to put HEPA filters on it or something, and anything like that kind of pristine condition. But it doesn't actually say anything here that there's prescriptive that you have to attain this level, and if you attain that, you have to do something. I think I believe that what I read before was the idea was they wanted each institution to pretty much do a soul-searching kind of exercise to determine for them to set a standard, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to look for it? What are we going to look for? How often are we going to look for it? And what when we see it, what should it be, and what should we do about it when we get there? Is that consistent with what you guys have grasped from reading this?
Ted, any thoughts from you? Ted's making thinking sounds. He's muted. He's muted at the moment.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was muted.
It was perhaps he was censoring the saltiness of his discourse.
Undoubtedly. It makes the challenge we have is that if every institution is supposed to develop their own standard that says, well, University of Michigan is going to test once a month and then make decisions depending on what the test results are, and Michigan State is going to test once a year and make similar assessments based on the results, then who's testing the right amount? And I think that's where the risk comes in.
That's exactly the good question, and I think maybe one of the reasons that the standard approaches it that way, well, you can take a positive approach and say, this actually is better than an outright prescriptive standard that simply says, this is what it is. You do have to draw bright lines in the world, even though there is no, where is the electron exactly, right? It's somewhere in this region, and to pretend that, well, it's either here or there, well, sometimes you do that for rulemaking just as a convenience because you have to make some kind of determination, but it's not always going to be a bright line in reality. Here in 7 it says, the water treatment, you create a program document, and basically maybe the purpose of the standard is just simply to, hey, everybody, don't ignore this. Just actually make a real effort to try and understand what your actual situation is and what you're really supposed to be doing. We all know in facilities we may have business processes and testing procedures and preventive maintenance schedules and all the rest of it that frankly of course maybe at Purdue it's different, but here at the University of Michigan there are days where we don't actually accomplish everything that we wish to. Sometimes things don't always get done, but at least you create a normative standard against which you can judge your efforts. And I guess having the standard also, and I don't know who else is listening to this, but I'm thinking from an organizational perspective. As Mike pointed out, we're always competing for resources, and the expectation of the people who have the resources is that they're going to continually withdraw resources and then make us compete stronger and do more with less. And one of the things is, you have a document like this, at least you can bring it forward and say, this is our standard. If you really want us to meet it, you are going to have to kick loose some resources. I know our own water treatment program has been underfunded for a long, long time, and I'm having to go to my boss and say, this is going to cost us this much more, and he's saying, well, yeah, but I've got to cut that much more out. So maybe this document is not so bad in that sense if we actually make an effort to say this is what we think we ought to do, and we can do an A, B, C, and that at least puts the funding sources to some degree on the hook for some of the decisions they make. It's very convenient to be able to wash your hands and say, well, we gave you this budget, you're the experts, you figure it out, you know. So I can see positives here. I do say the water treatment program documents, you know, you have to come up with, it doesn't say what you have to do, but it says what's your monitoring method and schedule for temperature measurements, for disinfectant residual or physical parameters in the hot and cold water system. There's lots of different possible physical parameters there could be. What are you doing to address public water supply interruptions? You know, what are your schedules and products and procedures? And that's actually probably not a bad thing to do generally anyway, right, to be a good steward of the resources you've got. The thing that really worries me is you're going to have to come up with procedures to be followed if there are known or suspected cases associated with the use of the potable and the other waters. And, you know, I'm not really sure, you know, maybe what you do is what you said about University of Michigan and Michigan State is, well, you know, what does it, let 1,000 flowers bloom? What are people doing that seem to be good practices that are not resulting in problems?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, there are some statements here. Your points are well taken, and
long-winded.
Very well. Well, no, you know, you can look at a document and immediately become hostile to it, and then you get into the gestalt of it and understand what the committee is trying to do. Clearly, there's integrity of purpose here. How can we afford this in the context of everything else we have to do? So there is a statement here about control limits, and I think this is what you're driving at. Is that?
Yeah, where is that?
At 6.1.3. So if your assertion,
Hang on.
if your assertion is what page is that? Page 7. If your assertion is that Legionellosis is always out there, now what's the level at which it's hazardous? Is that level as hazardous in a cooling tower as it is in a spa over at the athletic department?
I think it's almost certainly much worse to be in a. I'm a certified pool operator, or at least I was at one point, and I'll tell you what, I will never go into a hot tub. I mean, that's nasty. I mean, those are hot. That water is just exactly what you want to grow, not just Legionella, right? Which one is the control limit? I'm looking at on page 7.
Well, this is under general requirements.
There we go. Okay. Control locations, control limits. Okay. For each control measure at each level, you know, determine the limits. Yeah. Well, that's documenting to say. So that might correspond to what I was just saying. Well, we made a determination, and rather than, this was back in the 99 or 2000, where we just said, you know, rather than test for this because the information we have, which actually I don't know that I've actually ever read the research on that, that if you put out, you know, sampling stations or something and you look for it, you probably find some, that we're going to just say, and we conferred with other people, and it seemed reasonable that if we could keep our bulk water, you know, our bulk water colony forming unit counts down to 1,000, we would probably be doing a pretty good job. In fact, probably maybe a little bit over control. That without doing the things you need to do, say in swimming pools, where you actually need to do like 4 times a day turnovers and testing, you know, at frequent intervals, and actually having ORP sensors and actual real-time, you know, automated feeds and things, which we just absolutely can't even possibly begin to afford, and would take 5 or 6 years to implement if they gave us all the money for it.
Okay.
So well, we just made that determination as that seemed like a reasonable thing, but that would be a control measure, right? I mean, that would be the control limit, 1,000 colony forming units, and then what we don't have is a standard to say that when we exceed that, right, that we will get back to it within such and such a time frame or something.
Okay, so that sounds like an area we could mark up. You know, in the interest of time here, we've identified, we'll use the advantage of having Ted here and have 3 minds working on this at once, but we will have to work offline to actually get this stuff into this form. What form I'm trying to show you? I'm trying to show you how you actually enter it into the ASHRAE system. I think I showed that to you a little bit earlier.
At the back, usually they've got a couple of forms, right, for your comments.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, you had it up earlier.
I had it up earlier. So I'm trying to pick up some of the ideas that you had. But first, if Ted has any thoughts about what Craig just said. And we'll wait for him to unmute himself there.
I'm no great expert on this. All I can say is that the first poor slob who has somebody die from Legionella following all these rules will benefit the rest of us.
Yeah.
Because we'll then realize, or our bosses will then realize, how much money they really want to put into something in order to avoid the $1 million lawsuit.
Yeah.
Is this, do we rank spas as higher? You mentioned that spas would be a testing area more than a chiller, for example.
Well, if you're a swimming pool operator, I mean, and it's not the pool in your backyard where you can put any stupid thing in it you want, vodka if you like, right? But in the pools we have here, or say at the Huron Valley Swim Club where I was on the board for a while, and there are the health departments have pretty good and pretty strict expectations about what you're going to do as far as maintaining free, biocide residuals, testing and documenting what's going on there, and that's because the water tends to be in the range of what is going to be ideal for Legionella in particular, but not just Legionella, lots of bacteria, and your hot tubs and things they're at exactly the right temperatures, and they tend to have a lot of mechanical movement of the water, which froths it and so on. And even the worst is probably domestic hot water systems where you're in a shower or something and you're creating these aerosols, and anything that's in there is definitely going to be airborne, and it's going to be breathed in. What I read was that's actually is probably the domestic hot water systems are probably the worst, especially the ones where there's not a lot of flow through them. We have had a case where a guy got sick. I don't think it was Legionella, but it was in a machine room, right? And there was a little tiny hot water heater there, and it was a little hot water heater for a wash-up sink, and that heater is little like I don't know, like a 1 kV or something, hot water heater, and 1 kW I meant, and it was probably 5 or 10 gallons, and got sick probably from I think they thought there's stuff growing in there, and and we have some of those kinds of things here every once in a while because we got eye wash stations, and so you've got dead legs there, which means that what the city puts into the water for chloramines and disinfection, it'll eventually become inactive, but it's maintained at the right temperatures, and that's a real problem. The real problem is remediating a cooling tower. I remember back in 2000 we talked with some people, and there were they were concerned about standards in Europe where if they were testing for Legionella, and then when they detected it, they had to take the cooling towers offline and steam clean them and things, and which is pretty much an exercise in futility because it's going to be opened up again, right? I mean, the way you deal with high bacterial counts in swimming pools is you chlorinate it heavily to break point, right? And there are ways of doing that. I don't know what you do in a domestic potable water system, whether it's a heating hot water system. You can't really raise the temperatures high enough to actually kill off the stuff. In a circulating heating hot water closed loop, at least you can. The good thing about chilled water is that you're not breathing it normally, right? It's a closed loop.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've raised a lot of issues.
I don't know what you do, but the point is they do say corrective actions, and that's kind of going to be, maybe to meet the standards, you go through this and you establish your corrective actions, and then there it is. And then I suppose you're meeting the standard as long as you've done the documentation.
Yeah, you establish your own baselines with your own documentation. You'll see this in the ISO suite. ISO 14001 is another document that deals with sustainability, and rather than set thresholds, fixed benchmarks, 30% off ASHRAE 90.1, they'll say your criteria will be a smaller first derivative than it was the year before. So we want to see the rate.
One thing I would like to do is if there's anything in here that really does set like a minimum standard, says thou shalt test all of such systems at such and such an interval. I think you want to make sure that, and I don't remember anything in here that They actually did. I've got to take it home and read it over the weekend, I guess. But the original ones, it was, and that was one of the things that we were a little bit surprised about. It was a little vague as to exactly how often you should do it. I think that if we are going to write these standards, it shouldn't just be a philosophy major like me, right, and an engineer. We ought to have some cover here from people with actual, our occupational safety people. We should have some people from our hospital do this. We're going to need a team of people who are going to be able to, make some reasonable judgments. Just because I have an opinion about public health doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about. I could be wrong about some of these.
Okay. Well, you'll bet that the committee who drafted this will have, many will share.
The committee who drafted this it did not put numbers down, right? That's going to have to be something that each individual organization, I think that's what this thing is saying. This organization is going to have to determine, we are going to have to put numbers to it when we write our program.
We will rewrite, and those numbers will have to come with, we complain about having documents too prescriptive, and then we complain about documents being too performance-oriented. We are coming under our half-hour limit here. And
well, I wasted a lot of your time, I think.
No, you haven't. No, you brought energy and passion.
I had to think about it, and I really haven't done it a lot. You forced me to do it now.
Okay, well, you and I can start hammering away at this a bit. We do have until, I believe, November 10th. There was one area here that I thought a hot button having to do with training, since we'll be dealing with labor
where
issues.
is that?
Well, I think you should see it on the screen right now. And Ted, are you able to see the statement I made? I've actually suggested you don't need to have an epidemiologist with a master's degree to do this stuff in a hospital environment. Do you have any thoughts on that one, Ted? Let's give him a chance to be on.
In a hospital environment, you already have an epidemiologist. It's the non-hospital environments that would be a concern, but it just says a healthcare facilities. Okay.
Yeah.
Do I have a problem? No.
I like the out on the first one. I mean, the healthcare facility infection control program has. I've never heard of an infection preventionist there, but anyway, I mean, but certified in infection control by the Certification Board of Infection Control. I'm wondering about that kind of structure because. Healthcare facilities are all kinds of things, right? They do limit what some of them are as far as, people, but I think it was pretty much anything where somebody could be there for 24 hours. That's basically it? That's what counted?
I don't know, but I'm going to take a wild guess that this might be a trade association that sells training.
Yeah.
Okay, so we, I'm sure they're all well-meaning and such, but it does strike me as, classical market making, well-intentioned marketing.
I think you're right. I think the answer should be there should be some alternative pathways, unless it's. I mean, if it's, we know that, for example, a licensing board, say for an electrician, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a state that's codified in law, and everybody knows what that is and what the tests are. Mm-hmm. This is.
Okay.
I think that it would be good to have a little bit more flexibility in the skill level. I like, Mike, what you wrote there about a competent person, and by requiring master's degrees and things like that. Of course, somebody might look at that and say a specialist with equivalent training. That might be just too vague.
Right. Well, I'm putting some stuff out there. We can tighten that up a little bit, but we are coming upon the discipline we impose upon ourselves. Because while we've talked about that, 4 or 5 other issues have whistled just by.
Okay.
And so we grabbed this one because we felt that it would affect at least my interest. I had a personal interest in this. As some of you know, my daughter's on the athletic team, on the U of M rowing team. So the idea of her using the same therapeutic spa as the football players is not clearly my first choice. And so I'm concerned about the effect this would have on the athletic training facilities. But also I know that we obviously cannot afford to do everything. And we've got a hospital over here. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody in the hospital on the call. Of course, they'll be able to listen to our discussion on this one. So we have some time. What I'll do, I guess, given that we have to ration our resources, these will be due November 10th. And what I'll do is I'll post them up here on this. We are moving on to a different website, but for a moment, maybe I'll start launching the new website. I guess I don't have it up on here. Was it last week? Yeah, we'll be having a new website very shortly. Actually, we have two of them, and you'll see. Let's see, is this right? It looks like he's in the middle of fixing it right now. Yeah, he's fixing this one. So in any case, you'll start to see now all of these will take us to the ASHRAE suite. And
Okay.
so in any case, Ted, do you have any closing thoughts here before we, we'll just be able to throw a few ideas out there. I love it if somebody would like to help me walk them through this process. It's always my first choice. It's always my first choice to have others learn this. But if you don't have the time, then I understand that. So I'll just leave it at that.
Mike, one question that I have, and this is not necessarily something that really is here, except that they're calling it a standard, which I think implies that it might be incorporated into certain codes or other, or like hospital. I mean, it may be that the hospital certification agencies, for example, will grab this and just say, okay, you got to do this. But it's also, but its sense is more like a guideline, right?
Right. You saw me.
It does. It just says you should do this. Has anybody said anything to you about? Well, we're actually, so now ASHRAE adopts it, and it becomes the ASHRAE standard 188, right? 2015 or whatever it is. What does that mean? I mean, do we don't have to do it, right? Or do we? Is that something that
there'll be
Apple will require? I mean, in order to be able to. What does it mean? When do we go to our bosses and say, we got to pursue this?
Well, the public safety law will then, this is how usually it's done, will refer to a what I'll call a standard. I'll call it a standard, and then the standard then will refer, if I can show this, will refer to a guideline, to a guideline, and very often then the guideline is going back to a specification, and very often it's just somebody's good idea. Or we'll just call it inherited wisdom, or inherited wisdom that nobody understands where it ever came from. So you just reverse these arrows. That's how this stuff gets embedded into your operating culture. So whatever the local safety law is, so it'll start from somebody's good idea back to the specification, which will then, it'll be a health specification, there'll be a guideline and a standard and a public safety law. So that's a classical trajectory how these ideas are incorporated by reference into enforcement.
So you're saying that there will be an arc or a sequence of events which eventually will wind up probably having this codified in some kind of...
Right. Yeah, they'll say...
There are lots of possible avenues. It could be that, say, for example, plant operations will come out and say, we are going to conduct our activities in accordance with this standard, and then, or regents might pass a bylaw saying that this, or issue an edict or whatever happens.
Yeah.
Or, like you said, there could be legislation at the state level that specifies, or the county that would specify that facilities will comply with this within such and such a year.
Yeah, right.
The real question is, until somebody actually does that, I guess to some degree it's still all voluntary.
Well, that's right. So we know, of course, it's much easier to pass a law than to enforce it or pay for its conformity. So,
right.
But as you can see here, so all somebody has to say in some law, all applicable ASHRAE standards are part of this law. And then, of course, you just add it on the heap of laws we can't afford. So we have to be mindful of this one, though. It's who could possibly be against safety, Craig?
Yeah.
And with that, it's a good place where we'll end our call. Is it okay? We can talk. Ted, any closing reflections on this, Ted?
No, I'm just waiting for the next one to come along where it'll be worded the same way.
Okay. Hey, well, have a good weekend, Ted and Craig. Look forward to hammering more at this document, and we'll post our comments up there for others. We're just going to get these in, and we'll see what happens. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Thank you. Bye.